I want to start by saying that this wasn't supposed to be my summer. I had a plan. I had the plan. The one I'd been building since February, the kind of plan that college sophomores construct like architecture, every piece load-bearing. Mia and I were going to sublease an apartment in Tempe for June and July, split the cost of a parking pass, both pick up shifts at the same restaurant near campus, and spend our weekends at the lake. That was the plan. Mia was my best friend since the first week of freshman year. We'd met in the laundry room of our dorm, both of us too stubborn to read the instructions on the machines, both of us ruining whites together. We had inside jokes that required 15 minutes of backstory to explain to anyone else. We had a handshake. We finished each other's sentences so often that people assumed we'd known each other since childhood. And then in April, I found out she'd been sleeping with Dylan, my boyfriend of 14 months, the guy who'd driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu in January, the guy who had a drawer at my place and a key to my bike lock and a recurring Tuesday dinner with my friend group. Dylan, who had apparently been finding excuses to be alone with Mia since Thanksgiving, which I would later reconstruct with the sick precision of someone who can't stop picking at a wound, meant that the three of us had spent Christmas break texting in the same group chat, while two of them were keeping a secret that rearranged my entire understanding of the previous 5 months. I didn't find out dramatically. There was no confrontation, no tearful confession, no catching them together. The truth arrived the way the worst truths usually do, quietly, incidentally, through a door that nobody meant to leave open. It was a Tuesday in April. Mia had come over after her last class because she did that 3 or 4 times a week. My apartment was closer to the building where she had her afternoon seminar, and we had a standing arrangement that was never formally discussed, the way the best arrangements between close friends never are. She'd show up, drop her bag, raid my refrigerator with the comfort of someone who knew exactly where everything was, and we'd spend a few hours doing homework or watching something, or just existing in the same space, in the way that only works with people you're genuinely comfortable with. I'd had that with maybe 3 people in my life. Mia was one of them. Dylan was another. That Tuesday she'd come in complaining about a professor and she smelled like the outside, that sharp April smell of a campus in spring, and she asked if she could use my shower because she had plans later and her own dorm was a 15-minute walk. I said of course because it was of course. There was no version of that question between us that required any consideration. She set her laptop on my desk and her bag on my floor and went into the bathroom, and I heard the water start. I was sitting on my bed doing a reading for my sociology class. The laptop was open, the screen still on, angled slightly toward me in the way of a thing that isn't meant to be hidden because there's no reason to hide it. I wasn't looking at it. I was looking at my textbook. I remember the exact paragraph I was reading. Something about social stratification, something I'd have to revisit because I couldn't retain a word of it afterward. When I heard the notification sound, the screen lit and I saw the preview of the message the way you see things that you don't immediately process. The words landing in my eyes before they landed in my brain. And then they landed. I don't want to reproduce exactly what it said, partly because it doesn't matter in the specific, and partly because some part of me is still protective of my own dignity in this, the indignity of what I read being reduced further by repetition. What I will say is that it was not ambiguous. There was no reading it charitably, no angle from which it could have been innocent, no, well, actually, that my brain attempted. because my brain is not stupid even when I wish it were. It was the kind of message that exists between two people who have been physical with each other and are comfortable referencing it casually, which is somehow worse than something passionate or tortured. The casualness of it, the ease, the way it suggested that this was not new and not fraught, and not something either of them were losing sleep over. It was from Dylan. I sat there for a moment that I can't accurately time. It might have been 15 seconds. It might have been 2 minutes. The shower was still running. I could hear it through the wall, that ordinary domestic sound. And I remember staring at the bathroom door with a feeling I don't have a clean word for. Something that was grief, and something that was fury, and something underneath both of those that was almost clinical. A cold and very precise understanding, arriving fully formed. This is what is true, and you will have to decide what to do with it. I looked back at the laptop. I looked at the message again because I think I was still hoping, on some level, that a second reading would change the first. It did not. I closed my textbook and put it on the nightstand and sat on the edge of my bed and waited for the shower to stop. I didn't say anything when she came out. I couldn't find the beginning of the sentence. She was toweling her hair and talking about something. The plans she had later. Something about a restaurant. I couldn't track it. And I watched her the way you watch someone when you're seeing them for the first time from a distance, recalibrating the whole image. The 2 years of shared laundry rooms and handshakes and 15-minute backstories suddenly arranged themselves differently, like one of those pictures that looks like a vase until you see the faces, and then you can never unsee the faces again. She picked up her laptop. She put it in her bag without looking at the screen. She said something like, "Okay, I have to go get ready." And she hugged me the way she always did. That automatic full contact hug that had always made me feel like I had family at school. And I hugged her back because my body did it before my mind could decide not to, and I watched her leave. Then I sat in my apartment alone, and I called Dylan. He answered on the second ring. I asked him straight up what was going on between him and Mia. Told him I had seen the message. He didn't respond for long enough that the silence was itself a response, and I told him we were done. And I hung up. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't have one ready, and I don't think I could have delivered it if I had. I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about how I had been sitting in the same apartment 3 days earlier on a Saturday morning, eating cereal and texting both of them at the same time, and how ordinary and safe that had felt, and how that feeling had never corresponded to anything real. Dylan called back twice. I didn't answer. When he came over that evening, he showed up, which I hadn't expected, though I suppose I should have. I let him in because I had questions I deserved answers to, and he stood in my kitchen and cried and used the word complicated, and I listened to him with the absolute attention of someone who is deciding exactly how much of what they're hearing they believe. He wasn't lying, exactly. He was selecting. He was giving me the version that was most survivable for him. And I recognized the shape of it, the careful omissions and the strategic emphases. And I didn't interrogate any of it, because I realized halfway through that his explanation wasn't going to change anything I was going to do, and it was only going to cost me more of the night. I told him to get his stuff when I wasn't home. He asked if we could talk more when I'd had time to process, and I said I didn't know, which was true. But the thing I knew was that I didn't know was doing a lot of work in that sentence, covering for a no that I hadn't fully committed to yet, but that was already living in me. already settled. He left. I locked the door. I didn't contact Mia for 2 weeks. I let her texts sit unanswered and her calls go to voicemail, and I told myself I was waiting until I knew what I wanted to say. But honestly, what I was doing was grieving, and I needed to grieve in the specific direction of her without the conversation getting in the way. Because losing Mia was its own separate wound, distinct from what Dylan had done, with its own particular shape and depth. Dylan I had loved in the way you love someone you've chosen with intention and hope. Mia I had loved in the way you love someone who simply accumulated, who became load-bearing in your life gradually through proximity and consistency and the 10,000 small moments of being known. When I finally talked to her, she was sorry. I could hear that she meant it. The way I could also hear that her sorry didn't have any "what do we do now" attached to it. It was sorry as a closed door, sorry as the end of something. And what I felt listening to her was something I hadn't expected. Not fury, not even sadness, but a kind of exhaustion so total, it felt almost like peace. I was done. Not dramatically, not with a scene, just done. The way a light is done, a switch moved from one position to another. I stopped returning her texts after that. I rerouted my campus walks. I did all of it quietly, carefully, with the minimum amount of scene, because I had come to understand that the scene wasn't for me. It was for the other person's guilt, and my guilt wasn't hers to resolve. The apartment in Tempe fell through, of course. I gave up the parking pass. I withdrew from the sublease. And I found myself on the last day of finals in late May, sitting in my actual apartment, the one I'd kept through the school year, surrounded by laundry and half-packed boxes, realizing that my summer plan was gone, and the only place I had left to go was home, which brought its own particular kind of dread. I love my parents the way I think most people love a chronic condition. They're mine. I've made peace with them, but I wouldn't wish them on anyone else. My mom is a woman who experiences other people's lives as things that are happening to her. My success makes her proud in a way that's really about her. My failures make her anxious in a way that's really about her. My emotions are weather systems that she monitors for how they might affect her own forecast. She's not malicious. She's not even unkind most of the time. She's just porous in a way that means being around her requires constant emotional management. You learn to pre-edit everything you say, because anything unfiltered will be processed through her and handed back to you slightly wrong, slightly warped by the passage. My dad is more straightforward in his dysfunction. He's a man who peaked somewhere around 1997 and has been quietly furious about it ever since. He coaches youth baseball on weekends with the intensity of a man who needed that outlet to exist. And he has opinions about things, about my major, about my car, about the way I load the dishwasher, that he delivers with the calm authority of someone who has never once considered that he might not be the most qualified person in the room. He and my mom have been married for 23 years, and they disagree about almost everything. And rather than resolving any of it, they have developed an elaborate system of triangulating their disagreements through me, which is a therapeutic term I learned in my Introduction to Psychology course, and immediately recognized as the organizing principle of my childhood. So, home for the summer. 11 weeks, my old bedroom with the popcorn ceiling and the window that doesn't quite seal, and the box spring that sounds like an old ship when you roll over. My mom asking about Dylan until I tell her. And then the wave of maternal concern that would really be about her worry that my choices reflect on her. My dad asking why I changed my major from business, and then not really listening to the answer. I want you to understand the emotional state I was in when I loaded my car on May 28th. I was not someone fleeing toward something. I was someone fleeing away from multiple things simultaneously, toward a place that was merely the least bad option. I was 20 years old. I was heartbroken in the complicated way that involves grief for a best friend and a boyfriend at the same time. And I was about to drive 11 hours from Tempe, Arizona to Reno, Nevada, alone. I told myself the drive would be good. Decompression, a playlist I'd been building for 2 months, a large gas station coffee, the specific freedom of being in motion, with nothing required of you except to keep the wheel straight. For the first 8 hours, I wasn't wrong, but I should have stopped in Vegas. That's what I keep coming back to. I hit the Las Vegas city lights around 11 p.m., which was still reasonable. I could have taken a $60 motel room, slept 6 hours, finished the drive in daylight like a sensible person. But I'd been crying on and off since Kingman. The kind of crying that isn't really about one thing. The kind that uses a breakup as a door into something much larger and older. And I'd found that the only thing keeping it at bay was motion, speed, the white dashes of the highway disappearing under my car, in a rhythm that required just enough attention to keep the other thoughts quiet. Stopping felt like surrendering to the thoughts. So I kept going. I filled up in North Las Vegas. I bought a coffee and a bag of pretzels, and I texted my mom, told her I was almost to the state line because she'd texted me 3 times asking for updates, and I knew she'd keep texting until I answered. I looked at my phone's GPS and saw 4 hours remaining, and I thought, fine, I can do 4 hours. I turned north onto US 93 just past midnight. If you've never driven US 93 through rural Nevada at night, it's difficult to describe in a way that doesn't sound like horror writing, because the landscape seems to anticipate horror. The road is straight in the way that only roads through empty desert are straight. Not the pleasant, reassuring straightness of a Midwestern highway with farmhouses and billboards and the occasional grain elevator interrupting the horizon, but a brutal straightness, the straightness of a place that has no reason to bend. The land on either side is scrub and rock and low shadow, and every mile or so there's a reflector post on the shoulder, and its single eye glints back at you. And then it's gone, and then there's another one, and the rhythm of it over enough miles starts to feel almost hypnotic. The sky was extraordinary. I remember that. The kind of star density you don't believe in until you've seen it. A thick smear of light that seemed almost physically close. But it didn't make the road feel less lonely. If anything, it made it feel more so. The way a beautiful view from a window you can't open can make a room feel more like a cell. I was about 90 miles north of Las Vegas, which put me in the deep blank center of the state, when the lights on my dashboard started behaving strangely. First, just the battery indicator, a brief flicker that I noticed and then rationalized. Old car, long drive, probably nothing. Then the music cut out for a second and came back. Then the headlights dimmed, not fully, not to darkness, but enough that the road ahead seemed to retreat slightly, the shoulders narrowing into shadow. I sat forward in my seat the way you do when you're trying to make yourself more alert. I turned off the air conditioning because I'd read somewhere that it draws power, and I wanted to give the battery everything it had. Then the headlights went out completely, and the engine died, and my car coasted in the sudden, total dark of a Nevada highway at 2:47 in the morning. I pulled to the shoulder on nothing but momentum, which I'm grateful for, because I had the presence of mind to do that much before the reality of the situation fully arrived. I sat there for a moment in the dark with my hazard lights blinking. Those still worked. And I went through the stages very quickly, compressed by adrenaline, disbelief, the urge to try the ignition again, as if the third attempt would reveal the previous two as pranks, and then a sharp, clarifying understanding that I was alone on a rural Nevada highway with no cell service, in a car that was not going to start. I checked my phone. No bars. Not one. I held it up toward the windshield as if an extra 2 feet of elevation would help. Nothing. I got out and stood on the shoulder and looked in both directions. Nothing. Not a light. Not a sound. Not a gas station glow on any horizon. Just the road going straight into dark in both directions and the stars overhead that were beautiful and entirely useless to me. I was wearing shorts and a hoodie, and I remember noticing that the desert was cold in a way that surprised me. A dry, still cold that pressed in from all sides the moment I stopped moving. I got back in the car and locked the doors, which felt both necessary and slightly absurd. I turned on my phone's flashlight and propped it up, so something was lit around me. I counted my resources: half a bag of pretzels, 3/4 of a water bottle, a dead phone that was currently at 34% battery. I set an alarm in my head, the kind you set without a clock. Someone will come, I told myself. It's a highway. Someone will come. I want to say that I was calm, but I was not entirely calm. I was 20 years old and alone, and had been crying 3 hours earlier about my ex-boyfriend and my ex-best friend, and I was in one of the emptiest stretches of road in the continental United States. But I was also stubborn, and stubbornness is a close enough cousin to calm in the right circumstances. I kept the hazard lights blinking even as the battery drained. I told myself that the next pair of headlights I saw, I would stand outside and wave. I waited for 31 minutes before I saw lights. He drove a white pickup truck. I noticed that first. The white, which reads as almost luminous when the only other light source is stars. It was moving at highway speed, heading north the same direction I'd been going. And when I saw it, I got out of my car and stood on the shoulder and waved with both arms. And the truck slowed, and then slowed more, and then pulled in behind my car with his hazards on, parking maybe 30 feet back. I want to describe my emotional state at that moment, because I think it matters. I was flooded with relief. Genuine physical relief. The kind that loosens something in your chest that you didn't know was clenched. I was thinking, okay, this is going to be okay. This is just a flat tire story. This is the inconvenient kind of thing that happens on road trips and becomes a story you tell. I was not frightened of him. I was grateful. He was, and I've tried very hard to be precise about this, ordinary, not in a suspicious way, in a genuinely, almost aggressively ordinary way. He was somewhere between 55 and 65, with a white beard trimmed close, wearing a button-down flannel and jeans and boots that were scuffed in the way that work boots get scuffed from actual work. He had a slight paunch and the particular posture of a man who'd spent a lot of years in a truck cab. He introduced himself, a perfectly normal, 2-syllable American name, Gary, and he said something like, "That doesn't look good," about my car. And he shook his head in a sympathetic way, and he pulled a flashlight from his truck without being asked. He checked under the hood. He used words like alternator and draw, and explained what had probably happened in plain, patient terms. He said he didn't have the parts to fix it, but he did have jumper cables, and he thought if he charged the battery for a few minutes and I drove without any unnecessary power draw, no AC, no radio, minimum headlight setting, I might be able to get enough charge to make it to a town called Wells, which was about 40 miles north, and which had a truck stop and a motel and a mechanic who he said was pretty decent for this part of the state. I said thank you about 6 times. I meant it all 6 times. He jumped the car. It started. He said, "You should be okay," and I believed him, and I pulled out first because that seemed right. And he pulled out behind me, and I watched his headlights in my mirror fall back to a comfortable following distance. And I remember thinking, what a nice man. I remember specifically constructing a little narrative in my head about how this was the counterweight to everything that had gone wrong recently. The universe's way of demonstrating that strangers can be good, that people look out for each other. I want to note the exact milepost where the first thing happened that I couldn't explain. There was a junction about 12 miles up the road, a county road breaking off to the right, disappearing into darkness toward nothing I could identify. I'd clocked it on my GPS before I switched off my phone to save power, and I'd noted it as a waypoint, a landmark, a small proof that I was still on the right road. When I reached it, I put on my blinker out of habit, not to turn, just a reflex. And I watched in my mirror as the white pickup's blinker also came on. Then I didn't turn, and his blinker went off. I told myself this meant nothing. It meant nothing. He probably hadn't decided whether to turn, the same way I hadn't. Or he'd thought about turning and reconsidered. Lots of explanations. I kept driving. Wells was 40 miles away. The truck stayed behind me. Not close, not threateningly close, but present. I ran through the math the way you do when you're trying to argue yourself out of something. He's also going to Wells. He's a truck driver. Wells has the only truck stop for 60 miles in either direction. He was already heading north. Of course he's going to Wells. And I believed it. At mile 20, I found a turnoff. A gravel road branching east, unmarked, the kind of thing that leads to a ranch or a water tower or nothing at all. I don't know why I turned. I'll never be able to fully explain the impulse. Something just told me to, quietly, the way instincts work. Not as a voice, but as a lean, a gravitational suggestion. I turned without signaling. The white pickup turned behind me. I went another 100 yards on the gravel, with my heart doing something it had never done before. Not racing, but dropping. A nauseating elevator sensation, as if the floor had moved. And then I hit my brakes hard and did a 3-point turn, swinging back to the highway. And I watched the pickup do the same, unhurried, following my arc back onto the asphalt, as if this had been the plan all along. I turned off my headlights for 3 seconds, long enough to disappear from his sight. And I floored the accelerator. What followed was 40 minutes that I have never fully described to anyone. Not to my mom. Not to the highway patrol officer I spoke to later. Not to my friends back home. Not because it's too frightening, though it is, but because the shape of it is hard to communicate. The specific texture of being chased by something that never speeds up, never closes the distance, never does anything at all except remain. He didn't chase me. That's what made it so hard. He just followed. Whatever speed I drove, he drove. I hit 95 on a straight stretch and looked in my mirror, and there he was, 200 yards back, constant as a moon. I slowed to 45, hoping he'd either close up or pass, and there he was, slowing with me. The gap between us never changing, with the mathematical patience of something that had no particular reason to hurry. I tried the gravel turn-off trick twice more. Both times he followed without hesitation, and both times when I reversed course and returned to the highway, he did the same, as if my reversals were directions he'd been given in advance. I thought about stopping. I thought about the logic of stopping, getting out, confronting this, demanding an explanation. I thought about it for about 4 seconds and then discarded it completely. I thought about other cars. There were none. In 40 minutes on that highway, I saw 2 vehicles going the opposite direction, heading south, their headlights sweeping past mine with the terrible speed of things that can't help you. I considered crossing the median and going back south, toward Vegas, toward people and lights and options, but the median was wide and unpaved, and my car was already sick, and I was afraid of what would happen to the battery if I had to restart. So I drove, and he followed, and I tried to think. At some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, because time had stopped working correctly. I picked up my phone and turned it back on, but still, no signal. 1 bar appeared and vanished before I could decide if it was real. And then, somewhere past a long curve where the road briefly ran alongside a ridgeline, my phone buzzed in my hand. 3 bars. Solid. The notification sounds came in a cascade. Emails, a text from my mom, a missed call from a number I didn't recognize, and I was already dialing before I'd consciously decided to dial, my thumb finding the 3 digits by something older than thought. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I started talking before she finished her sentence. I told her I was on US 93 heading north. I told her I didn't know my exact mile marker. I told her there was a white pickup truck that had been following me for... I looked at the clock. 43 minutes, matching every turn, every speed, every move I made. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be. Steadier than I felt. She asked me to describe the vehicle. She told me a unit was in the area and to keep driving north and stay on the line. I want to tell you I felt immediate relief. I felt some. But the headlights were still there, and 30 miles is 30 miles. And knowing that something is coming is not the same as it having arrived. I drove. I talked to the dispatcher. I answered her questions. I watched the road, and I watched the mirror, and I counted the reflector posts going past. It was maybe 12 minutes later, though it felt like its own separate lifetime, when I saw the lights flickering against the flat dark of the highway. A Nevada Highway Patrol cruiser parked half on the shoulder with its overheads running, positioned across my lane at an angle that said, "This is not a suggestion." I drove by him and watched in my rearview mirror as the officer pulled the white pickup over. I pulled into the Wells truck stop 18 minutes later and sat under the canopy lights for a long time without getting out of my car. I put my forehead against the steering wheel, and I stayed there until my breathing decided to act normal again, which took longer than I would like to admit. I slept 4 hours in a motel that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, and I have never loved a smell more. The mechanic opened at 7, confirmed the alternator, had me back on the road by noon, with a new battery as well for good measure. I ate breakfast at a diner attached to the truck stop. Eggs and toast and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime in the previous decade, and I ate all of it. I drove the rest of the way home in daylight with my phone plugged in and every contact I had open and ready to call. I watched my mirrors the entire time, which is something I still do. I didn't turn on the radio, I just drove. I got home at 6 in the evening. My mom hugged me in the driveway for a long time and didn't ask questions, which was the most generous thing she's ever done for me. My dad had an opinion about the alternator that I let wash over me without hearing it. I ate dinner. I slept in my old room under the ceiling fan that still hums. I slept for 11 hours. The next morning, I was scrolling through the news on my phone when I saw a headline about a man apprehended on US 93 connected to cold case homicide investigation. It was Gary,